When the invitation arrived, it wasn't handwritten like the ones I used to send for family gatherings. It came as an embossed envelope, thick, perfumed, and printed with gold letters that shimmered faintly in the light. Dinner at our home, it said. Friday evening, 7 p.m. Signed, Olivia and Ethan. I remembered turning the card over in my hands, feeling the raised ink under my fingertips. It was elegant, too elegant, the kind of elegance that tries too hard to convince the world it belongs. My son's handwriting was nowhere on it. I placed it gently on the table beside my teacup and sat for a long moment, listening to the faint rustle of the bamboo outside. The house was quiet, as it had been for years now, since Ethan married Olivia and moved into the city. I had imagined that silence would bring peace, but that evening it only deepened the ache of distance. When he married her 2 years ago, I had told myself to be open-minded. Olivia was beautiful, sophisticated, and came from a family that prided itself on refinement and wealth. She carried herself like someone who had studied exactly how to charm, but never how to listen. Still, I wanted to believe she loved him. That belief was my first mistake. I spent the next few days preparing for the dinner, not because I wanted to impress her, but because I wanted to steady myself. I baked almond cookies the way Ethan used to love when he was a boy, small, crisp, with just a hint of orange zest, and chose a pale blue silk blouse that had always been his favorite color. I told myself that this evening wasn't about appearances, it was about family. But even as I told myself that, I could feel the unease blooming beneath my ribs. On Friday, the driver sent by Ethan arrived precisely at 6. He was polite, distant, the way people often are when they've been instructed to be professional. The city skyline loomed ahead as we drove, glass and steel glittering against the sunset, as if the world itself was wearing jewelry. When we reached their house, I paused before stepping out. It was magnificent, a white, modern estate with tall windows and manicured gardens, every light glowing with deliberate warmth. Yet something about it felt staged, too perfect, too symmetrical, like a smile held too long. My son's handwriting was nowhere on it. I greeted him at the door with that familiar nervous energy he always had before important events. "Mom," he said, hugging me quickly, "you look great." He looked tired. His eyes, the same warm brown as his father's, had a flicker of anxiety behind them. "Thank you, dear," I said softly. "It's good to see you." Then Olivia appeared. She was stunning, of course. Her hair swept up into a perfect knot, a string of pearls resting against her collarbone. The dress, cream-colored, fitted just right, looked like it had been chosen for the occasion of being admired. "Mrs. Chen," she said, smiling with just the right amount of politeness. "You made it." She leaned forward as if to kiss my cheek, but stopped short, as though unsure if such affection suited the moment. "Please," I said gently, "call me Mei Lin." Her smile flickered. "Of course. How thoughtful of you to come all this way." Thoughtful. The word hung in the air like perfume, sweet, empty.
Inside, everything gleamed. Marble floors, crystal glasses, art that looked expensive and cold. I could smell lavender candles and truffle oil. Someone had curated this house like a museum, every item placed not for comfort, but for admiration. Ethan led me to the living room, where 2 of Olivia's friends were already seated, laughing too loudly. They wore glittering jewelry, spoke of travel, and complimented Olivia every few sentences. I smiled politely, sat quietly, and watched. That's something you learn with age, to see without speaking. At one point, Olivia turned to me and said with a laugh, "I told them you're quite traditional, Malin. You even make your own tea by hand. Isn't that charming?" There it was, that small, polished dagger of a compliment. Everyone smiled. I smiled too, but inside, I felt the faint sting of condescension. I simply replied, "Yes, and I find the quiet moments of preparation are what make the tea worth drinking." Her laughter faltered. Dinner was served in the dining room. Long table, white linen, too many forks. Ethan tried to keep the conversation going, but Olivia dominated it. She spoke about art auctions, exclusive clubs, a potential trip to Monaco. Every word carried the weight of presentation, as though she were performing a version of herself she wanted the world to see. I looked at Ethan from across the table, his smile polite, his posture slightly hunched, his eyes duller than I remembered. When I asked how his work was going, Olivia answered for him. "Oh, he's doing very well. He just doesn't give himself enough credit. You know how men are. They'd rather work than rest." Ethan smiled awkwardly, cutting his steak too carefully. There it was again, that subtle imbalance, control disguised as affection, the same tone she used when she spoke of her dear friends or silly assistants. After dessert, Olivia's friends excused themselves and Ethan offered to walk them out. I was left alone with her for the first time. She poured herself another glass of wine, swirling it slowly. "You must think we live so differently from how you raised Ethan," she said suddenly, her voice soft but edged. "I think you both live beautifully." "Beautifully," she repeated. "That's one word for it." Then she smiled, but her eyes bidn't. "You know, sometimes I think Ethan's too attached to his past, his childhood, simpler things. You understand, don't you? You're from a different world." There it was, the veil lifted just enough to show the steel beneath. I took a breath and said, "The world may look different, Olivia, but love feels the same in every language." For the first time, she looked unsettled. Then Ethan returned, cheerful and oblivious, and the conversation ended like a candle snuffed too early. When it was time to leave, Olivia hugged me lightly. "It was lovely having you, Maylin. We should do this more often." "Of course. Next time, you must come to my home." Her smile froze. "Oh, I'll check my schedule." In the car on the way back, I looked out at the city lights streaking past, thinking of the way Ethan's eyes had looked. Tired, careful, dimmed. I remembered how, when he was little, he used to run to me after school with stories bursting from his mouth, his laughter filling the kitchen. Now he laughed differently, measured, as if someone had taught him to filter his joy. That night, as I placed the invitation card into my desk drawer, I understood something important. Some dinners are not about food or family. They are silent wars, fought with smiles, wine glasses, and words that sound kind but mean otherwise. And though Olivia didn't know it yet, I had fought many such wars before, and I had never lost one.
There are moments when silence tells you more than words ever can. After that dinner, Ethan's phone calls became shorter, though his tone remained gentle. He asked about my health, my garden, the weather, all the small, polite topics that sit between hearts when something larger is being avoided. I never pressed. I simply listened, noting the pauses between his words, the faint sigh he tried to mask before saying goodbye. In the weeks that followed, I kept myself busy. I watered the orchids, practiced calligraphy, walked by the lake every morning, yet each quiet task seemed to echo back the same thought. Something was shifting, slowly, quietly, like a crack forming beneath polished glass. Then, One Sunday afternoon, Ethan came alone. He didn't call ahead, which surprised me. When I opened the door, he stood there holding a small box of pastries from our favorite bakery, the one we used to visit every New Year's morning. "Hi, Mom," he said softly. "I was nearby." Nearby? It was an odd choice of words. His home was nearly an hour away. I smiled and stepped aside. "Then come in. The kettle's on." He followed me into the kitchen, the air filled with the scent of jasmine tea. For a while, he just sat there, sipping quietly, eyes fixed on the rising steam as though searching for answers in it. Finally, I said, "You seem tired, Ethan." He smiled faintly. "Work's been a lot. Olivia's planning something big for the firm. She wants me to take on more public-facing roles." I nodded, waiting. "She says it'll look better if I'm more visible." He gave a small laugh. "I think she means presentable." I looked at him carefully. There was something in his tone, part humor, part defeat. "Do you agree with her?" I asked. He hesitated. "I want to support her. She's ambitious." "That's good, right?" "Ambition can be beautiful," I said softly, "but only when it doesn't consume what's already beautiful." He looked up, as if he wanted to say something more, then shook his head. "I'm probably overthinking it." We ate our pastries in silence after that. But when he left, I stood at the door and watched his car disappear down the narrow road, the sunlight bouncing off the windshield. I knew then that something was indeed wrong. Not broken yet, but straining. The next time I saw Olivia was at a charity gala she had invited me to. She said it would be good for Ethan's image if his family showed support. I wore a simple jade green cheongsam, my hair pinned low. As I entered the ballroom, full of people in glittering gowns and tuxedos, I could feel how out of place I looked among their practiced smiles and polished shoes. But I didn't mind. I've lived long enough to know that presence doesn't require adornment. Olivia spotted me instantly. "Maylin," she exclaimed, her voice carrying that careful balance between surprise and control. "You look lovely, so graceful." She placed her hand lightly on my arm, too lightly, as if afraid of smudging herself. Ethan appeared behind her, his expression bright, but his eyes tired. "Mom, you came." "Of course I came. You invited me." Olivia's smile tightened. The evening flowed like a perfectly rehearsed play. Olivia glided through the room, laughing at all the right moments, complimenting everyone with an ease that almost seems choreographed. Ethan followed, attentive but quiet, a man orbiting someone else's gravity. At one point, I stood by the table and overheard a woman whisper to another, "She's amazing, isn't she? Olivia practically built that firm's reputation. Poor husband. Must be hard to keep up." They laughed softly, and though their tone was harmless, I saw Olivia's head tilt just slightly, her lips tighten before she turned towards them with a dazzling smile. She heard. She always heard everything. Later, when I approached Ethan near the bar, he was nursing a glass of whiskey. "Do you like the event?" I said, "It's beautiful. Olivia must have worked very hard." "She did," he said quietly. "She works hard on everything." He looked at me then, as if wanting to add, "including me," but stopped. A waiter passed by with a tray of canapes. Olivia took one, laughed at something a man beside her said, and touched his arm briefly. It was small, meaningless. Or maybe it wasn't. The man's laughter lingered longer than it should have. I glanced back at Ethan.
He was staring too, but with that same polite, careful expression I'd begun to recognize. Control. Always control. When the event ended, Olivia gave a closing speech, flawless and stirring, about community, vision, and partnership. The crowd applauded, cameras flashed, she looked radiant, but her hand never once reached for Ethan's. That night, when I returned home, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking of his eyes, the way they dimmed slightly each time she shined brighter. The next morning, I found myself writing a letter. Not to Ethan, not to Olivia, but to myself, a way to make sense of the things that could not yet be spoken aloud. I wrote, "A woman's silence is not always surrender. Sometimes it is the sound of her measuring the depth of another's deceit."
A month later, Ethan came again. No pastries this time, just a quiet knock and the faint scent of rain on his coat. He sat in the same place, his posture tense. "Mom," he began, "do you ever feel like you're being managed?" The word startled me. "Managed?" He nodded. "Like someone's making decisions for you, in your best interest, of course, but still taking the choice away?" I said nothing for a while. Then I answered, "Yes, I've felt that, especially when people confuse care with control." He looked up sharply, meeting my eyes. "That's exactly it." He ran a hand through his hair. "Olivia means well. She really does. She doesn't like when I disagree, or when I don't respond fast enough. She says it makes her feel disrespected." There was pain in his voice, not from anger, but from confusion. The kind of pain that comes from loving someone who hurts you unintentionally, but too often. "Does she listen when you explain?" I asked. He gave a small, sad smile. "Listening isn't really her strong suit." I reached across the table, touched his hand. Love shouldn't require shrinking to fit someone else's comfort. He closed his eyes for a moment, then nodded. "I know, Mom. I keep thinking maybe I'm not doing enough." Ah, there it was. The quiet guilt that women like Olivia know how to cultivate without ever speaking it aloud. After he left, I stood by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. In each drop, I saw a reflection of my son, good, kind, and slowly disappearing under the weight of someone else's expectations. And in that moment, I understood something chilling. Olivia didn't just want to shape their marriage, she wanted to rewrite it, page by page, until Ethan's voice no longer appeared in the story. The ripples had begun, and though they were still soft and quiet, I could feel them spreading, outward, relentless, inevitable. They say intuition is a woman's oldest inheritance. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It doesn't accuse, it observes. And over time, those whispers become truths you can no longer unhear. After that rainy afternoon, I tried not to think too much about what Ethan had said, but thoughts have their own will. They return at night, between breaths, between the sound of tea being poured and the faint creak of wood as the house settles. I began noticing the small things first. Olivia's texts to me became colder, clipped, formal. No more, "How are you, Maylin?" or "We'd love to have you over." Now it was, "Ethan will be late tonight," or "Ethan's been very stressed. Please don't worry him further." The phrasing caught me, not what she said, but what it implied. She had begun managing not just Ethan, but me. Still, I stayed silent. Not because I didn't care, but because I understood that silence, used wisely, could be a shield.
Then one evening, Ethan called again. His voice was low, tired. "Mom, can I come by tomorrow? There's something I want to show you." He didn't say what, but the way he said something made my heart ache. The next day, when he arrived, he looked worn. His tie was loose, his eyes rimmed with red, not from tears, but from lack of sleep. He set a folder on the table. "I need you to see this," he said. Inside were company memos, event schedules, social media posts, all meticulously branded, all listing Olivia Reed, Director of Communications, in elegant, bold letters. I didn't understand at first. Then I saw what was missing. "Your name isn't here," I said quietly. He nodded. "That's the problem. This entire mentorship campaign was my proposal. I wrote it. Olivia presented it as her own." I looked at him, the lines of exhaustion carved deep around his eyes. "Did you confront her?" He hesitated. I tried. She said I was overreacting, that she just reworded it to fit the company tone. Then she laughed and told me I should be flattered she trusted my work enough to use it. The words sat between us, heavy and poisonous. "Ethan," I said softly, "love can survive mistakes. It cannot survive dismissal." He looked down, his voice cracking slightly. "I don't even know what's real anymore, Mom. She's so good at explaining things away that I start believing I'm the one imagining it." Gaslighting, a word I had only recently learned from one of my former students. But the act itself, I had known all my life. You're not imagining it. You're being made to question what you know. He looked up then, eyes glistening, the child in him breaking through the man. "How did you stay so sure of yourself when Dad left?" I smiled faintly. "Because I knew what was true, and truth doesn't need defending, only remembering." He nodded slowly. Then, after a long pause, he whispered, "I think Olivia is hiding something." I didn't ask what. I didn't have to. The way he said it, not with anger, but resignation, told me that whatever it was, he already feared the answer. Weeks passed. The seasons began to shift again. The jasmine in my garden bloomed early, filling the air with its sweet, aching scent. Ethan visited less frequently, though I knew it wasn't by choice. One evening, while cleaning, I found an envelope on my doorstep. Elegant, cream-colored, unmarked. Inside was a formal invitation embossed in gold lettering. Reed and Partners Annual Winter Gala, hosted by Olivia Reed, featuring special guest James Ellison, CEO of Ellison Global. My pulse quickened. James Ellison, the same man who had once worked with me years ago when I was still teaching international business language programs in Singapore. He had been one of my mentees, actually, a shy young man then, struggling with Mandarin pronunciation, always nervous before presentations. I had coached him, patiently, until he found his rhythm. He used to call me Teacher May. I hadn't seen him in over 15 years. I wondered why Olivia had sent the invitation. Was it obligation or strategy? Either way, I sensed purpose behind it, the kind of calculated gesture that looks generous on the surface, but hides something sharper underneath. The night of the gala, I arrived early. I wore a deep navy dress with a silk shawl and a single pearl pendant, a gift from my late husband. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and laughter. Everything glittered, but the light felt cold, distant. Olivia greeted me with her signature poise. "Mei Lin," she said brightly. "So glad you could make it. James Ellison will be thrilled to see you." I smiled. It's been many years. I'm curious to see how he's grown. Her expression faltered just for a second, barely noticeable, but enough. Then she recovered. "Oh, you've met before." "Yes," I said. "He was my student once." There was a flicker in her eyes. Surprise, then something else. Calculation. She turned smoothly and gestured toward the stage. "Well, he's about to give his keynote. You'll see what an excellent speaker he's become." As the evening unfolded, I watched the crowd's adoration pour toward Olivia. Her charisma filled the room, her laughter perfectly timed, her presence magnetic. But beneath all of it, I saw the cracks forming, not visible to others, but to someone like me, trained to read pauses, eyes, breaths. When James took the stage, the moment his gaze swept across the room and found me, he froze. Then his face broke into a smile. "Before I begin," he said into the microphone, "I want to thank someone very dear to me, someone who taught me that words can build bridges. My first Mandarin teacher, Mei Lin." Gasps rippled through the audience. Heads turned. Olivia's hand, resting on Ethan's arm, stiffened. James gestured toward me warmly. Without her, I wouldn't be standing here today. I rose slightly, bowed my head in acknowledgement. The applause that followed was kind but uneasy, because it wasn't Olivia who had received the attention this time. Afterwards, James approached me personally. "Teacher May," he said with that same boyish enthusiasm I remembered. "It's been too long." "Far too long," I said, smiling. "You've done well for yourself." He laughed. You taught me how to do well. I owe you everything." We spoke for a while, politely, briefly, but I could feel Olivia's gaze on us across the room like a knife's edge. When the evening ended, she came to me, her smile brittle. "Well, that was unexpected. Life is full of surprises." She tilted her head. "You seem to enjoy them." "I enjoy seeing old students succeed," I said evenly. Her lips curved, but her eyes did not. "Of course, we all have our legacies." At that moment, I realized that this wasn't jealousy. It was fear. Fear of being eclipsed, even for a moment. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the moon spill its light across my garden. Something had shifted at that gala, not just in the room, but in the power between us. Olivia had always believed she could define the narrative, that her charm could rewrite the truth. But now the truth had surfaced, uninvited, undeniable. And I sensed she would not forgive that easily. From that night on, the ripples I had once felt became waves, subtle no more. What had once been small acts of control would soon become open acts of possession. What had once been quiet envy would become something darker. A quiet war, waged beneath smiles and silver spoons. And though I didn't know it yet, that dinner, the one that would change everything, was already being planned.
When I was a young woman, my grandmother once told me, "A mirror never lies, Maylin. It only waits for the right light to show the cracks." At the time, I thought she meant vanity. Now, years later, I understood she was talking about people. After the winter gala, I noticed something in Olivia that hadn't been there before, or perhaps something that had always been there but was now too fragile to hide. She had lost her rhythm. Her smiles came half a beat too late. Her words, once smooth and deliberate, began to tremble at the edges, as if she was constantly calculating what the right thing to say should be. Ethan didn't notice it at first. Men rarely do. They listen to words, women to silences. But I did.
It began with the little things, the way she called less often, the way her thank yous sounded perfunctory, her eyes darting elsewhere. She began avoiding me, not openly, but with a subtle choreography of excuses. Once, I called to ask about Ethan's upcoming business trip. She answered too quickly, her tone defensive. "Oh, that? He'll be with the London team, company event, nothing major." But I could hear faint music in the background. Not office sounds, not travel noise, but the clinking of glasses and laughter, a party, and not one that I had been told about. It was in that moment I realized something fundamental. She wasn't just managing Ethan anymore, she was isolating him. A few weeks later, Ethan came by unannounced. He looked drained, his usual composed demeanor replaced by a quiet agitation. "Mom," he said, setting his briefcase down, "I think Olivia's been hiding expenses from me." He ran a hand through his hair. "There's money missing from our joint account. Small withdrawals at first, then larger ones. She says it's for gifts, donations, event deposits, but the numbers don't add up." I poured him tea, steadying my voice. "And what do you think?" He said, "I think she's lying, but I can't prove it yet. Every time I ask, she turns it into a fight, says I'm controlling her, that I don't trust her." He laughed bitterly. "It's like she's rewriting the argument before I can even speak." That was when I felt the quiet fear that only mothers know, the kind that comes not from what has happened, but from what's coming. "Ethan," I said softly, "when a person begins to fear accountability, they start creating alternate truths. Be careful which one you agree to live in." He nodded, eyes downcast. "She's been different since that night, the gala. I think James Ellison's recognition, it embarrassed her." I hesitated before answering. Maybe it reminded her that respect isn't something you can curate. It's something people feel when you're not speaking. He gave a tired smile. "You always have a way of making sense of things." I placed my hand on his. "Promise me something. Don't lose your own clarity trying to fix someone else's illusion." He didn't answer, but I saw the conflict flicker in his eyes. Love makes even the smartest people fragile. A few days later, I ran into Olivia by chance, or perhaps by design. It was at a boutique cafe downtown, the kind of place where the desserts look too perfect to eat. She was sitting with two women from the corporate board, laughing brightly. When she saw me, her smile froze just long enough for the others to notice. "Mylène," she said, rising quickly. "What a surprise." "Indeed," I replied. "I didn't know you came here often." "Oh, occasionally," she said airily. "Just discussing a new communications campaign." Her colleagues exchanged polite smiles. One of them, a younger woman with sharp eyes, asked, "Are you related to Olivia, Mrs.?" "I'm her mother-in-law," I said simply. "Oh." The woman smiled warmly. "Olivia always speaks so highly of you." That was the first lie of the day. I could tell by the way Olivia's eyes hardened. After they left, Olivia lingered, pretending to check her phone. "You shouldn't just appear like that," she said under her breath. "I didn't appear. I walked in." She laughed softly, but her tone was cold. "You know what I mean. People start assuming things when mothers hover too much." I looked at her calmly. "And what should they assume, Olivia?" She held my gaze for a moment, then smiled. The kind of smile that hides a curse inside it. "That you don't have to be involved in everything." Her words were sharp, deliberate, but I didn't react. I'd spent too many years around diplomacy to mistake hostility for strength. "Don't worry," I said gently. "I have no desire to involve myself in anything that doesn't concern me." And then I added, very quietly, "But family always concerns me." Her expression faltered just for a second, and that was enough. Over the next few weeks, the tension in the house grew thicker. Ethan avoided confrontation, Olivia sharpened hers. When they came for Sunday dinner, The air between them was taut as wire. I tried to keep things light. A new recipe, a story about my students, but laughter fell flat. When Olivia excused herself to take a work call, Ethan leaned in and whispered, "She's been messaging someone a lot. Says it's her new PR client." Something in his tone told me he didn't believe it. Neither did I. After dinner, I watched from the window as they left. Olivia walked ahead, heels clicking fast, her body language defensive. Ethan walked slowly, his hands in his pockets, not defeated, just lost. I stayed there long after their car disappeared down the road. The jasmine in my garden had begun to wilt. The air smelled heavy, like rain. There's a specific kind of grief in watching someone you love being consumed by manipulation. Not overtly, but gradually through small acts that erode confidence. A word here, a correction there, until one day they no longer trust their own perception. And that's when you lose them.
Weeks later, I received another message, this time from Ethan's assistant. A formal dinner was being organized by the company to honor key partners and family, hosted by Olivia, of course. When I arrived that evening, I immediately noticed the arrangement of the room, elegant but calculated. Olivia was at the center, radiant under the chandeliers, her laughter echoing just a touch too loud. Every detail, from the color scheme to the music, screamed of perfection. But perfection is a fragile performance. All it takes is truth to crack it. Ethan greeted me warmly, though I could see the weariness behind his eyes. When I asked how things were, he just smiled thinly and said, "Let's just get through tonight." As the guests began to settle, Olivia moved toward me, guiding a tall, silver-haired man beside her. "Maylin," she said, her voice almost too sweet, "I'd like you to meet James Ellison again." Ah, so this was her stage. I smiled at him. "James, it's lovely to see you once more." He grinned. "Teacher May, still graceful as ever." The room went quiet. A few heads turned. Olivia's smile tightened, just slightly. "She seemed to know each other quite well," she said lightly. "We do," James replied easily. "She taught me Mandarin back when I could barely pronounce ni hao. I owe her half my confidence today." Laughter rippled through the room, genuine this time. But Olivia didn't laugh. Her hand clenched around her champagne flute. I looked at her, and for the first time, she looked small. Not in stature, but in spirit, like a reflection starting to fracture under the weight of its own image. That night, after everyone left, I stayed in the parking lot for a long moment before driving home. The moonlight shimmered across the hood of my car, and I caught my reflection faintly in the window. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was inevitability. Because people like Olivia, people who build their worth on perception, eventually collapse under their own performance. Not because someone exposes them, but because truth has its own gravity. It always pulls you back. I thought of Ethan then, of the kind boy who used to bring me wildflowers after school. I thought of how love, when tested, can become either compassion or control, and how Olivia had chosen the latter. And as I drove home, I realized something quietly terrifying. The cracks in Olivia's mirror were no longer just visible. They were spreading.
There's a particular silence that follows truth. Not peaceful, not empty, but dense, like the air after a storm. It carries the weight of what's been said and the echoes of what can never be unsaid. That was the silence in Ethan's house the week after the dinner. No shouting, no tears, just stillness. The kind that comes when two people stop pretending they understand each other. I didn't hear from either of them for 3 days. When Ethan finally called, his voice was brittle. "Mom," he said, "we had a fight." He didn't need to explain. I could already hear it in his breathing. There's a rhythm to heartbreak. Inhale, denial. Exhale, realization.
She accused me of humiliating her in front of the company, said I let James disrespect her, that I didn't defend her reputation. I wanted to tell him that reputation is only as fragile as the truth it hides behind. But he didn't need lessons. He needed quiet. So I just listened. She left the next morning. He continued. Took her things, said she needed space. But I think, his voice cracked, I think she's gone for good. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Outside, a sparrow landed on my balcony railing, tapping its beak against the glass, as if asking to be let in. Life has a cruel way of moving forward, even when hearts stand still. Ethan, I said finally, sometimes love ends not because it failed, but because it fulfilled its lesson. He exhaled shakily. What lesson is that? That people can only meet you as deeply as they've met themselves. The days that followed were strange, not tragic, just hollow. I kept expecting her to call, to appear, to offer one of those carefully crafted apologies that sound polished but mean nothing. But she didn't. Instead, I received a letter. Handwritten, folded twice, tucked into an envelope without return address. The handwriting was unmistakably Olivia's, precise, elegant, the kind of script that demands to be admired. Maylin, by the time you read this, I'll be somewhere far from the noise. I don't expect forgiveness, nor do I seek it. I just need to say, I never meant to hurt Ethan, or you. But somewhere along the way, I forgot who I was trying to impress. I built a version of myself for him, for the world, for you even. The poised, unshakable Olivia. And then I met you, and you saw through it instantly. That terrified me. You never said a cruel word, never raised your voice, yet I felt smaller every time I stood near you. Maybe because you were everything I pretended to be, and you never had to perform it. If I'd had the courage to be honest sooner, perhaps things could have been different. Please tell Ethan that I did love him, in the only way I knew how. Olivia. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer where I keep Ethan's childhood drawings, another kind of fragile truth. I didn't show it to him that night. Some wounds need to close in silence. Weeks passed before Olivia reached out again. This time, she called. Her voice on the phone was subdued, stripped of its polish. I know you don't want to talk to me, she said quietly, but I wanted to say thank you. For what? I asked. For not destroying me when you could have. I closed my eyes. That was never my intention. I know that. That's what made it worse. The line was quiet for a long moment, filled only by the sound of her breathing, hesitant, human. Then she said, I've started therapy. I need to unlearn the way I was raised, the constant need to prove, to win, to be admired. It's exhausting. Her honesty surprised me. It didn't excuse what she had done, but it softened something inside me. A small corner of compassion I thought I'd sealed away. I hope you find peace, I said gently. She laughed, a tired, trembling laugh. Peace feels like something I haven't earned. Peace isn't earned, Olivia. It's allowed. The line went quiet again. When she spoke, her voice broke slightly. Please tell Ethan I'm sorry. Not for leaving, but for pretending. I nodded, though she couldn't see it. I'll tell him when he's ready to hear it. Thank you, she whispered. Goodbye, Maylin. And just like that, she was gone again. But this time, her absence didn't feel like a wound. It felt like closure. Spring came slowly that year. The jasmine bloomed again. Ethan began spending his evenings on my porch, helping me repot the garden. He didn't talk about Olivia much, but one evening, as the sun dipped behind the roofs, he said, I got her letter. My hands froze over the soil. You did. He nodded. She sent a copy to me too. I read it. Twice. And? I believe her. Not in the way that makes things right, but in the way that lets me stop hating her. He looked at me then, eyes clearer than I'd seen in months. He used to think love meant holding on. Now I realize sometimes it means letting go, with grace. I smiled, a little sadly. That's what your father used to say. He chuckled softly. Guess I'm finally listening. We sat in silence as the first fireflies appeared, tiny lights moving without direction, but with purpose. Somehow that seemed fitting.
A few months later, I received one last message from Olivia. A postcard, a photograph of a quiet coastal town, the sea pale blue under morning light. On the back, in her familiar script, she'd written only, "The air here smells like salt and forgiveness. Thank you for teaching me both. Oh." I didn't reply. Some conversations don't need words to end. They simply dissolve. That night, I made jasmine tea and sat by the window, watching the moon rise. The mirror across the room caught my reflection, older, wiser, calm. There were cracks there too, of course, lines of time, of loss, of understanding. But unlike hers, mine didn't need hiding, because when truth finally settles, it doesn't shatter you, it shapes you. And in that stillness, I whispered into the quiet, may we all learn to forgive, even when the apologies come too late.
People think revelations arrive like lightning, sudden, blinding, impossible to miss. But the truth is quieter than that. It slips in like sunlight through thin curtains, inch by inch, until one day you notice the room isn't dark anymore. That's how it came to me, not as a moment of discovery, but of recognition, as if life had been whispering the same truth for years, and I was finally ready to listen. It began with a dream. In it, I was standing in a vast field of golden grass. The wind was gentle, carrying with it the scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen. Ahead of me was a woman, her back turned, her figure familiar. She was wearing a cream dress, the hem brushing the tops of the grass. I called out, but she didn't turn. When I reached her, I realized it wasn't Olivia. It was me, a younger version, the woman I had been before Ethan was born, before I had learned how to temper my emotions into composure. She looked at me with eyes that still believed love could fix everything, and she asked softly, "When did you stop letting people see you?" I woke up crying. Not the kind of crying that comes from sadness, but from the sudden understanding that I too had worn masks. Not out of vanity, like Olivia, but out of fear. The days that followed, I found myself sifting through old journals, boxes of photographs, fragments of my own youth that I had buried beneath years of polite restraint. In one of the journals, the pages yellowed and soft from time, I found an entry written the night before my wedding to Ethan's father. Tomorrow I marry a man who loves me, but I'm afraid he doesn't really see me. He sees my calm, my logic, my grace, but he doesn't know the storms I hide beneath. I sat there for a long time, reading those words over and over. They felt like they belonged to another person, and yet they explained so much of who I had become. I had spent years perfecting the art of serenity, of being the composed mother, the rational woman, the patient teacher. But serenity is not the same as peace. Serenity is a mask. Peace is a surrender. Maybe that's why Olivia unsettled me so deeply, because she was the mirror I never wanted to face. Loud in her insecurity, desperate for approval, terrified of inadequacy. She lived in extremes I had long ago suppressed. And seeing her stumble was like watching my younger self in the moments I've spent decades pretending never happened. The revelation I realized wasn't about her apology.
It was about mine, the one I owed to myself.
That evening, I visited the garden again. Ethan had gone out with colleagues, leaving me alone with the faint hum of the city and the scent of night jasmine. I lit a single candle on the porch, a habit from my teaching years in Taiwan, the light symbolizing attention, reflection, and I began to speak aloud, not to anyone in particular, but to the version of myself I had silenced. "You did the best you could," I whispered. "Even when no one understood you, you made mistakes, yes, but you also learned to stay kind when it would have been easier to turn cold. You stayed." The candle flickered. A moth circled it, then flew off into the dark. I smiled faintly. Sometimes survival is just learning when to stop fighting the flame. The next morning, I received a call from James Ellison, the same man who had unknowingly set the events of the dinner in motion. "Mei-Lin," he greeted, his tone warm. "I have something to tell you." I hadn't spoken to him since that evening. Our connection was brief but meaningful, professional respect laced with an unspoken understanding. He continued, "I've been reviewing our expansion plans for the Asia division, and I'd like to invite you to serve as a consultant for our cross-cultural communication program. It's about bridging emotional intelligence between Western and Eastern leadership. Your name kept coming up." I laughed softly. "That's a surprise." He chuckled. "Not to me. You have a way of making people see themselves more clearly. That's rare." His words struck deeper than he knew, because that was exactly what I had been doing, guiding others to self-awareness while quietly avoiding my own reflection. "I'll consider it," I said, smiling. "Good. We could use someone who understands that truth doesn't need to be loud to be powerful." When I hung up, I stood for a long time by the window, the morning light warm against my hands. I realized this was the first time in years that a new opportunity had come my way, not because I sought it, but because I had finally stopped hiding from myself. That evening, Ethan came by again. He looked tired, but softer. He carried a small paper bag in his hands, pastries from the same bakery Olivia once favored. He said, "I thought we could have tea." We sat on the porch again, the cicadas singing faintly from the trees. He said, "Mom, I've been thinking, maybe we really don't outgrow people. We just grow into different truths." I looked at him, proud of how he had learned to name his feelings instead of running from them. "That's very wise," I said. "You've always had her kindness, you know?" He smiled sadly. "And your stubbornness." We laughed. It felt good, light. Then he looked at me seriously. "She wrote again, from the coast. She's teaching at a small community center now, language and communication. She said it's because of you." I blinked, surprised. "Of me?" He nodded. "She said you reminded her that listening is also a form of speaking." Something in my chest loosened. Perhaps revelation wasn't about learning something new, but recognizing that the things we gave, compassion, patience, grace, didn't vanish when they went unnoticed. They continued quietly, like ripples moving through still water. Later that night, when I was alone again, I opened my journal and began to write. Today I learned that forgiveness isn't the end of the story. It's the door to understanding. The hardest part of loving others is realizing that their flaws reflect your own, and loving them anyway. We are all mirrors, and what we see in others is the unfinished truth of ourselves. I closed the journal, feeling lighter than I had in years. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled softly. Not a storm, just the echo of change. And for the first time, I didn't brace for it. I welcomed it. Because this time, I finally knew that revelation doesn't destroy, it frees. Forgiveness, I learned, doesn't happen in a single moment. It happens quietly,
in the pauses between one breath and the next, in the choices you make long after the anger has faded. The morning after my talk with Ethan, I woke to birdsong and the soft rustle of wind through the curtains. For once, I didn't rush to make tea or check my phone. I just lay there, watching the light shift across the ceiling, thinking about how strange peace can feel after years of guarding yourself against pain. It was a small peace, fragile and new, but it was real. Later that day, I decided to visit the university where I used to teach. It had been nearly 5 years since I'd stepped into that building. My resignation letter back then had been short, polite, distant. I told myself I needed rest, but in truth, I had simply lost the energy to keep being everyone's voice of reason while mine grew quieter and quieter. When I entered the courtyard, students were spilling out of lecture halls, their laughter echoing off the white walls. For a moment, I felt invisible again, just another older woman standing in a place that had moved on without her. Then I heard a familiar voice. "Professor Lin?" It was Sarah, one of my former students. Her face lit up when she saw me, and before I could speak, she hugged me, tight, sincere. "You came back. We've missed you. Everyone still quotes your language is empathy lecture." I laughed softly. "I'm surprised anyone remembers." "Of course we do," she said. "You taught us that words aren't just tools, they're bridges." Her words struck something deep inside me. Maybe I hadn't lost my purpose. Maybe I had just been waiting to find the right place to use it again. When I left the campus, I sat in the car for a while, the invitation from James Ellison still tucked in my bag. Consulting for his new program suddenly didn't feel like a leap. It felt like a continuation of everything I had once loved: teaching, listening, helping people connect. So, I said yes. The next few weeks moved like the rhythm of a new song, unfamiliar but beautiful. The consulting work challenged me in ways I hadn't expected. My sessions were filled with executives and team leaders who spoke confidently but listened poorly. I began each class with a simple exercise. Tell me about a time you misunderstood someone and what it cost you. The room always went silent. Then, one by one, they spoke. About broken deals, damaged trust, pride that turned into regret. And every time I thought of Olivia, not with bitterness anymore, but with an odd kind of gratitude, because she had forced me to see the limits of my own quiet pride and to rediscover the language of empathy I had nearly forgotten. One evening after a long session, I returned home to find a letter on my porch. The handwriting was unmistakable, careful, elegant, and faintly trembling. It was from Olivia. I stood there for a long time before opening it. The paper smelled faintly of salt, perhaps from sea air or from tears. "Malin, I've started teaching at a small community center. Nothing grand, but it makes me feel useful again. I tell my students that confidence isn't about sounding perfect, it's about meaning what you say. I think I learned that from you. There are things I can't undo, but I wanted you to know I carry the lesson you gave me. Respect is the quietest form of strength. Olivia." I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it inside my journal. The paper was thin, but the weight of what it carried felt immense. I didn't reply right away. Some words are better answered through time, not ink.
That weekend, Ethan came over with his son, my little grandson, Leo. He ran through the door, shouting, "Grandma, Grandma, I made you something!" In his tiny hands was a paper crane, folded unevenly, but with so much care. I took it from him as though it were made of gold. "Do you know what this means?" I asked. He shook his head, curls bouncing. "It's a symbol of peace," I said. "When someone gives you a crane, it means they hope your heart is light." Leo grinned. "Then you can fly." I laughed, the sound surprising me.
It had been so long since laughter felt that effortless. Ethan watched from the doorway, smiling faintly. For the first time in years, the house felt full, not of noise, but of life. That night after they left, I sat on the porch again with my tea and the paper crane beside the candle. I thought about how much had changed and how much hadn't. The world was still flawed, people still spoke carelessly, and pride still bruised hearts. But now I understood that peace wasn't about fixing everything. It was about choosing what to nurture. The roses in my garden had begun to bloom again. Their petals were thinner this season, a little weathered by wind, but in their imperfection, they were even more beautiful. I touched one gently and smiled. That was life. Soft, scarred, but still reaching toward light. A few days later, at the new consulting office, I walked into the meeting room early. The glass walls caught the glow of the sunset, painting everything gold. On the whiteboard, someone had written in large, uneven handwriting, "Listen to understand, not to reply." I stood there for a long moment, reading the sentence again and again. Somewhere, Olivia had learned that truth and passed it on. And that, I realized, was the real aftermath. Not destruction, but continuation. Everything we say, everything we do, ripples outward, touching people we may never meet again.
That evening, I called Ethan. "Do you remember the old story of the paper cranes?" I asked. He smiled through the phone. "The 1,000 cranes, the wish for peace?" "Yes," I said. "I think I'll start making them again. Maybe fill this house with them until it remembers laughter." He was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "I think it already does." After we hung up, I took a square of paper and began folding. My hands were slower now, but steady. Each fold felt like a prayer. For Olivia, for Ethan, for myself. For all the people who had hurt and healed and tried to become better. By the time I finished, the first crane sat perfectly balanced on the table, its wings poised as if ready to take flight. I wrote one final note in my journal that night. The aftermath is not the end. It's the soft hum after the storm, the proof that something survived. Healing isn't loud. It's the sound of paper wings unfolding in the quiet. I blew out the candle, and in the darkness, I could almost hear it. The faint rustle of 1,000 unseen cranes, carrying peace where words had once failed. Sometimes, the most powerful lessons come not from grand gestures or public apologies, but from silence, from what is finally understood without being said. Months had passed since the dinner that had changed everything. The garden outside my window had transformed again. The roses were fading, replaced by clusters of chrysanthemums. Their scent was subtler, less romantic, but comforting in its steadiness. They reminded me of the kind of beauty that doesn't ask to be noticed. It simply endures. I had spent most of my life teaching people how to communicate, how to use tone, rhythm, and phrasing to connect. But it took the cruelty of misunderstanding and the quiet courage of forgiveness to teach me what truly mattered. Respect was not about eloquence. It was about attention. That morning, I was preparing tea when I heard a car pull up outside. Through the window, I saw Olivia step out, hesitating by the garden gate. She was dressed simply, in soft colors this time, beige and pale blue. No sign of her usual need to impress. She stood there for a long moment, clutching a small bag in both hands as though gathering the courage to knock.
When I opened the door, she looked startled. "Mrs. Lynn?" she began softly. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me." I smiled. If I didn't, I wouldn't have opened the door. Her lips trembled into something like relief. "May I come in?" "Of course." Inside, the house was filled with the scent of jasmine and the faint sound of a bamboo wind chime swaying by the porch. I gestured for her to sit, and she did, carefully, like someone afraid to break something delicate. She said, "I brought these." Opening the bag, inside were small steamed buns, still warm, wrapped in a clean towel. "I thought you might like them." I accepted them with a nod. "Thank you. I haven't had these in years." For a while, neither of us spoke. The air between us wasn't heavy this time. It was tentative, but open, like a wound learning to breathe again. Finally, she said, "I saw Ethan last week. He told me you're teaching again." "I'm consulting," I corrected gently. "Teaching adults how not to speak before they think." She smiled faintly. "That sounds like a lesson I could use." I looked at her then. Really looked. Her face was thinner, her expression softer. The pride that once defined her had been replaced by something far more human, humility. "You've already learned it," I said. "You're here, aren't you?" She looked down, her voice trembling. "I made things harder for you than you deserved. I said cruel things because I was ashamed of myself. You were everything I wanted to be, educated, respected, self-assured. And instead of learning from you, I tried to tear you down." I poured her tea, letting the silence fill the space between her confession and my reply. "Do you know what I see now? A woman who finally stopped pretending she had nothing left to learn. That takes courage." Her eyes glistened. "I wish I had realized that sooner." "Most people don't. But life is patient. It keeps giving us the same lesson until we understand it." We drank our tea quietly. Through the window, the late autumn light filtered across the table, turning the porcelain cups gold. She looked around the house, her gaze pausing on the shelves lined with books, and then on the little paper cranes I had begun folding again. "You made these?" she asked. "Yes, one every night. For peace." Olivia reached out, touching one with delicate fingers. "They're beautiful. Do they work?" I smiled. "Sometimes. Not in the way people expect. They don't bring peace to the world, only to the person who makes them." "I think I'd like to try," she whispered. "Then you should." "Fold your forgiveness into the paper. It remembers." She nodded, her eyes distant but calm.
A week later, Ethan and Leo came by. My son had that same careful gentleness he always carried after big emotional storms, like someone who'd learned to approach peace with respect. "Mom," he said, handing me an envelope, "you've been invited to the foundation dinner again. They want to recognize your work with the new language program." I smiled, tracing the embossed lettering with my thumb. I suppose life enjoys its little circles. He chuckled. "Will you go?" "Yes," I said, "and this time, I'll bring someone with me." "Who?" "Olivia." He blinked. "You think she'll come?" "I know she will," I said. "Some lessons are meant to be shared." The night of the dinner arrived cold and clear. The venue shimmered with lights, crystal chandeliers catching reflections like stars. It was strange walking into that room again, the same kind of polished crowd that once made me feel like an outsider. But this time, I wasn't nervous. Olivia arrived beside me, simple but elegant, her posture straight and her eyes steady. She no longer wore confidence like armor. She simply existed, comfortably in her own skin.
When we entered the hall, heads turned. I heard murmurs, whispers, the small sounds of people stitching stories together from assumptions. But I let them. People would always whisper. It was what they didn't say that mattered. Adrian Ellison, James's younger brother, now leading the foundation, greeted us warmly. "Maylin, you came. And this must be Olivia. I've heard a great deal about you." Olivia blushed. "Good things, I hope." "The best kind," he said with a wink. Dinner passed more easily than I could have imagined. There was laughter, shared memories, and for once, not a trace of pretense. I caught Ethan watching us from across the table, his expression one of quiet awe. Later, as people began to leave, he came over and kissed my forehead. "You always said kindness isn't weakness. I think I understand that now." I squeezed his hand. "Then I've done my job as a mother." Later that night, Olivia and I walked together under the canopy of string lights outside the hall. The air was crisp, filled with the faint scent of pine. "I never thought I'd see the day we'd share a table again," she said. "Nor did I admitted. But here we are. Maybe forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing not to let memory decide who we become." She smiled, looking up at the stars. "You always have a way of turning pain into poetry." I laughed softly. "It's not poetry, dear. It's survival." When I returned home, the house was quiet again, save for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. I walked to my writing desk, took out my journal, and began a new page. Forgiveness is not the closing of a story. It is the rewriting of it, line by line, in softer ink. Outside, the wind rustled through the garden. A single paper crane fluttered off the porch railing and landed on the ground. I bent to pick it up, brushing off the dust. It was slightly crumpled, imperfect. But as I placed it back on the table, I realized that even broken wings can rest beautifully. The next morning, sunlight poured across the living room. I sat by the window with my tea, watching Leo chase butterflies in the yard while Ethan helped him. The sound of their laughter drifted through the air, free, full, alive. I thought of all the years that had brought me here, of misunderstandings, of pride, of pain, and how they had all been necessary steps toward this simple peace. In the end, the lesson wasn't about winning or proving anyone wrong. It was about listening, truly listening, even when your heart wants to close. Because in listening, we let love find its way back home. And as the breeze carried the scent of jasmine through the open window, I whispered to no one in particular, maybe to life itself, "Thank you for teaching me how to speak without words."